Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Kyle from Mountain Woodworking. Today, we're building an epoxy table. We won't be building a traditional river table. Instead, we're going to be encasing this walnut slab. So this is actually my favorite way of building an epoxy table. I really like finding slabs like this that just have the natural beauty and character and just enhancing that with the epoxy. So when we found this particular slab, we had a pretty good idea of what we were going to do with it. Like all epoxy builds, you start with building a mold. Now this is not always the most exciting part. It's not the most exciting part for us to do and for you guys to watch. But obviously without a mold, you can't have an epoxy table. Now there's a few things to consider whenever you build a mold. What we do is we make the mold an inch or two bigger than what our final measurement of the table is going to be. The reason for that is you always go back and trim an inch or so off the length and the width just to get yourself a good straight cut. And we also make our end boards as tight as we can to the slab. That just eliminates any extra waste of the epoxy. Once the mold is built and we're happy with how it looks, we take the slab out, do one more final cleaning before putting the slab back in to get ready to pour. Until we put that pigment in. So we used roughly 20 gallons of epoxy into this table. Now that's a lot of epoxy. We don't usually use that much epoxy for a single table, but the way this slab is kind of laid out and the vision that we had for it, it called for this much epoxy. So we're excited to put the epoxy into this and see how it turns out. So the color you see here is called Battleship Gray by Black Diamond Pigments. We really like their pigments. This is pretty much the only company we use. I've used this particular pigment before a lot in the past. Every time I use it, I'm just extremely happy with how the colors turn out. I have never built a table with this pigment that looked similar to one that I made in the past. So that's what I like about it. Every time you mix it, you get different colors, you get different ways that the epoxy and the colors settle together. It's really one of our go-tos. Once we're done mixing the epoxy, we typically let it sit for about a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. As you see here in this time lapse, it just shows all the bubbles coming up and releasing before we get ready to pour. The way we like to pour our epoxy tables is to do it in stages. So we typically do 2 to 3 separate pours per table that can last over a week or two. The main reason we do it this way is because I hate wasting epoxy. Epoxy is expensive. So if we do it this way, you're pouring that thin layer, and if you let it sit for a day, you're going to see if you have any small leaks in your mold. Now we spend a lot of time building the mold. We do our best to make sure it's airtight so we don't have leaks, but this way we're just assuring ourselves that if there's a leak, we still have a chance to fix it before wasting too much epoxy. Another reason we do it this way is it allows us to alter the color. If we don't necessarily like the color or we want it more transparent or darker than that first pour, we could just add more or take more of the pigment out, and that'll correct it for the next pour. We let this pour fully cure to make sure that we wouldn't have any more leaks moving forward. with the rest of the pours. Anytime you let epoxy fully cure and you're planning on pouring another coat over it like we do here, you need to go back to that first pour. You need to lightly sand it to make sure the bond between the new pour and that cured epoxy is going to be strong. We actually did one more pour that we didn't get on video, and that final pour was just to top everything off. And we actually overflowed onto the table quite a bit, but that's okay. We like to overfill our molds and then come back and sand all that off. We let this table sit for about 2 weeks before we come back and start taking the mold off. Now, this is definitely one of our favorite parts of the building process. This is just fun. We just like taking these things apart and seeing what this table is going to look like. Now, we're very lucky to have a friend with a wide belt sander, especially one big enough to get this table through. There's no way that we're going to be able to get an even finish sanding this by hand. This is the only right way to do it. To give you guys an idea of how long a process like this takes, this took about an hour and a half to about an hour and 45 minutes. And all we're doing here is just sanding that epoxy off, getting it back down to the wood, making sure everything is flat, making sure that the slab is straight before we can move on to actually sanding it by hand. We were able to get this table sanded up to 150 grit with this wide belt sander. Now, obviously, the sanding is not done there. We are going to take this table all the way up to 320, and the rest we're going to do by hand. Once we're done with the sanding and we're happy with how it looks, we do one final clean of this table. All we use is an air compressor and some rags, just making sure to get all the dust and any particles that were left from the sanding so we have a nice smooth finish. This is the part that we really all enjoy, adding this first coat of finish and really just seeing this table come to life. So we ended up building a solid walnut pedestal base for this table, and we really racked our brains on what base to put under this table. Typically, we do the metal bases, which we love and look great, but we just want to do something a little different and a little special for this table. That's why we went with the walnut base to pull in from the walnut slab in that epoxy, and we're just really happy with how this whole table turned out. We really appreciate you guys watching the video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you liked the video, hit the like button, even subscribe. We got a bunch more that we're going to be building upcoming, so stay tuned for future builds. Thanks, guys. See ya.